I believe that white progressives cause the most daily damage to people of color.
Why don't Republicans want their kids to know the tradition of anti-racism in the United States?
And it is the promotion of critical race theory, an ideology that sees my blackness as victimhood and their whiteness as oppression.
Of course, being in a relationship with a black man does not free white women from the inevitable anti-blackness we internalise. Topics for discussion include, but are not limited to, what is meant by whiteness, outwoking, diversity and tokenism, the idea that white silence is violence, and what I'm calling nobody hates woke white women like other woke white women too. Hello and welcome back to the Laytonicles channel. It is I, the Layton in question, and today we're going to be continuing on with our journey into the wonderful white world of nice racism, the sequel to the cultural phenomenon that was the book White Fragility, which, if I were to give like a little summary, it's essentially all white people are racist. Here's what they should and shouldn't do about it. So even if you don't know of this book, it's got to be relevant to your life because, you know, culturally it's in the waters, so on and so forth, etc. It seemingly draws on the works of critical race theory, whiteness studies, and postmodernism, all the things, you know, within the zeitgeist. Whilst this is the second video in this review mini-series of nice racism, it's not imperative for you to watch them in order, so if you're here, just stick around, and you can always go back at the end. Last time it was very heavy on the theory side, whereas now we're gonna be getting elbow deep. But in case you're new, I should probably introduce myself, give like a relay of why you should listen to me in particular, which, you know, as I said last time, you shouldn't. I'm an internet clown. The first thing of note, though, that I should probably highlight is that, you know, as you can probably already tell, I'm a brown person, a black person, etc. This book is seemingly written by white people for white people, and so because the book is about how to treat people that look like me, so to speak, it makes sense that I jump in like Corbin Blue so I can have a look of what they're saying. How are we supposed to be treated by the whites? Additionally, I also did a review of the prequel book, White Fragility, that seemingly a lot of people liked, that somehow racked up over 500,000 views for a goddamn book review, my broskies. When's the last time you saw something like that? Never. I'll tell you when. Done it once before, can he do it again? Will you enjoy it? Hopefully, we'll see. Also, and this one's kind of wanky or whatever, I have a master's degree in which, you know, usually I wouldn't care about that, but because we're mildly dabbling in kind of like academic waters and things of that nature, it probably makes sense that I'm at least familiarity. I'm aware. So what won't this video have? I hear you ask. One thing is ads, so, you know, you can just watch this at your own leisure, ad break free. I will not be making any schmeckles on this. However, what will this video and the series have? I hear you ask. It will have page numbers and citations and analysis and jokes and hopefully entertainment along the way, but I guess you'll be the judge of that. Dance for me, internet clown. That's essentially the relationship that you and I have. Just like the last review that I did of White Fragility, the series will get spicier and spicier as it goes along. So, you know, the longer you stay, the more you get out of it, which is kind of like Hot Ones, I suppose. We'll get spicier and spicier as we go along. Whoa!
Must cost a lot in dry cleaning.
Of course, we'll have swigs of milk in between, because there are, and should be in a whole book, good points, which, you know, there's some, so I'll highlight those. Also, we'll have a nice little palate. Oh, isn't that some tasty little milk that we've had before we get onto the final prerequisite, I suppose, trigger warning. Jokes, as Dr. Diangelo would have for her own audience.
I do use humor, and I want to say a little bit about why I use humor.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, are all the prerequisites. That's all you need to know going forward. This is nice racism explored by me with you in the passenger seat, so to speak. Let's jump in together.
デートに来る
Off rip. However, I should probably confess that already I have kind of lied to you, because I said that we were done with the theory and now we can get elbow deep into the book. That's not necessarily the case. We're so close, there's just a tiny precursor before that, so to speak. And so the first heading or chapter that I have for you, my broskies, is called What is Whiteness? In areas such as these, you will constantly come across the terms such as whiteness and, you know, what does it mean to be white and things of that nature. And so, page 8, Robin Diangelo states other verbs. And black people know that most of us can't answer the question of our own whiteness and that we bring that inability to the table. So, before getting into the, I suppose, more academic or esoteric versions of this whiteness, so on and so forth, I would relay some of the things that I have come across over the years to kind of exemplify instances that can be suggested to be whiteness, let's say. So, we have the great outdoors was made for white people. Presumably it's this thing of, oh, because more white people go outside and hiking and camping, that it's systemically racist against black people. Maybe black people just don't give a shit about camping and the great outdoors. Anyway, we have by Vice, the climate movement is overwhelmingly white, so I walked away. So, you know, climate activism, whiteness, apparently. We also have by Vice, why so many white supremacists are into veganism. Okay. And finally, did you know that time itself is white?
But today, I want to talk to you more about the political nature of time. For if time had a race, it would be white. White people own time.
I just want to highlight that came from a professor at Rutgers. This is actual academic stuff. Oh, go to university or propel in life. I don't know about that, Chief. Have you seen what's being taught at universities nowadays? And so now we will go through the more academic to esoteric, how it's being used in the zeitgeist, let's say. So again, from the Journal of the American Psychoanalytic Association. Whiteness is a condition one first acquires and then one has a malignant parasitic-like condition to which white people have a particular susceptibility. The condition is foundational, generating characteristic ways of being in one's body, in one's mind, and in one's world. Parasitic whiteness renders its hostiles' appetites voracious, insatiable, and perverse. These deformed appetites particularly target non-white peoples. Once established, these appetites are nearly impossible to eliminate. Effective treatment consists of a combination of psychic and social historical interventions. Such interventions can reasonably aim only to reshape whiteness's infiltrated appetites to reduce that intensity, redistribute their aims, and occasionally turn those aims toward the work of reparation. When remembered and represented, the ravages wreaked by the chronic condition can function either as warning, never again, or as temptation, great again. Memorialization alone, therefore, is no guarantee against regression. There is not yet a permanent cure. So this seemingly is suggesting that whiteness is kind of like a parasitic ailment. It doesn't necessarily, in kind of like clear language, say how it changes the host, so to speak, but it seemingly speaks about it as though it's kind of like a pandemic of whiteness. It kind of like passes from person to person and kind of just like grows insurmountably. One particular thing of note is that it says that white people have a particular susceptibility. We'll come back to this because it's not necessarily saying that all white people suffer from whiteness. And it's also not saying that you have to be white to have whiteness either. So that's interesting, isn't it? That's something that we'll more than likely revisit at a later point in the series. Also, I just want to point out that the person that wrote that paper, that from, you know, that excerpt that I just showed you, he's a social worker. So, you know, where is this thing popping up in various places in society and culture and so on? Psychology and social work, apparently. I also came across an article by NPR titled understanding multiracial whiteness and Trump supporters. Again, you do not have to be white, apparently, to hold the characteristics of whiteness. I understand that this video is talking about Robin Diangelo's Nice Racism, and we, again, will be going through very in-depth quotes from this book. This is it's a precursor that's necessary, because how do you talk about race relations and whiteness without going through what whiteness is? And because she's speaking to an audience that she already has, she says, and I think I say this in the previous video, that essentially she starts from certain premises and assumes that the reader does too, and so she doesn't actually explain in the book what whiteness is, even though it's a hugely influential theme within the book. So I'm essentially having to do the work and relay to you what whiteness is, because she fucking won't do it, essentially. So, one definition of whiteness that we can look to comes from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And again, this isn't necessarily directly from Robin Diangelo. However, scroll down a little bit on their website and you can see that they show her off, at least. We're in the correct ballpark anyway, is what I'm saying. Whiteness, what is it, and so on, because as I said, she won't tell you, so I'm going to have to. I'll just go through a handful and then we'll move on to the actual analysis of this book, given that after the fact, you know, we've got the framework to go forward, let's say. One point is family structure. The nuclear family, father, mother, 2.3 children, is the ideal social unit. To characterize that as an aspect of whiteness, I'm like, according to who? And also, if you look at marriage rates, the ethnicities, or races rather, that stay together in these kind of committed relationships, nuclear families essentially, are primarily Asian people, you know, raising children, nuclear family, traditional upbringing, so on and so forth. So to characterize that as an artifact of whiteness, I'm like, what are you smoking, my dude? It seems kind of like a polite or like politically correct way to be like, have you ever noticed how black children don't have their fathers around? What's that all about? It's a little bit sus to me. Here's an aspect of white culture, whiteness, according to this: objective, rational, linear thinking. I'm sorry, do black people and other people of colour not think rationally? Is that what you're saying? Protestant work ethic. Hard work is the key to success. Again, another thing that is apparently an artifact of white culture, because, you know, only the whites work hard. Apparently, this is all very low-key racist. It's like, hey, white people do all the things that push them forward in life, or some of the things that can push you forward in life, and it's like, what's the deal with those other races? Future orientation. Apparently an artifact of whiteness is that they plan for the future, delay gratification, and have the concept in mind that tomorrow will be better. You know, generally speaking, tomorrow is better, but apparently only for white people, because they delay gratification. Apparently other races don't do that. This is from the supposed anti-racist people, but then they highlight these qualities that for me I would consider to be kind of like positive human traits, but then they say, you ever notice how white people, like, what are you talking about, bro? And then it's like, if you do these, are you white adjacent? I care about time and punctuality. Does that make me white adjacent? What the fuck are we talking about, my dudes? You know, that all seems very abstract when you merely see it on kind of like a screen or a piece of paper or however it was disseminated. But, you know, you see videos of this kind of stuff in real life and it's like, okay, for instance, I've come across video evidence, documentation. Somebody thinks that good behavior is an artifact of whiteness. Roll the clip.
Things like making sure that you're following directions and making sure that you're sitting quietly and you are in your seat, and all these things that come from white culture. So if we're positively enforcing these behaviors, we are by extension positively enforcing elements of white culture, which therefore keeps whiteness at the center, which is the definition of white supremacy.
So there you have it. Now you know what whiteness is, and I would say, running off mere stereotypes and kind of generalizations of particular cultures, I would say that many of those artifacts of whiteness, many of them are more stereotypical of Asian community. I'll go through a couple of them with you, but I really think there is a high chance within the next few years that Asians are considered to be white, or to embody whiteness, or to be white adjacent, or whatever lyrical, spherical, miracle way they put of saying it. For instance, one of the things within that illustration that I just showed you is hard work is the key to success. I came across recently that China has a kind of cultural norm. It's referred to as 996, which is this idea of working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. We don't have that here. We're all lazy as shit. Comparatively anyway. To characterize these as what? It's so kind of like America-centric or kind of like narcissistic to be like, to not look outside to the rest of the world, you know? I don't know, dude. It's wild anyway, whatever it is. Because again, we did that kind of like abstract of, where it essentially said that whiteness was a parasite. It didn't say that all white people have whiteness or that you have to be white to have whiteness. Again, it's apparently whiteness is a particular thing, but it's also like, well, if it's not tied to race, so, you know, white people, why even call it that in the first place? Oh, we're being provocative because we call it whiteness. It's just intentionally confusing. Oh, just change words and make up whatever they mean and whatever, and then get mad when lay people don't understand what you mean by them. Oh, we're not saying that all white people. Why'd you call it whiteness then? You fucking clown. So now that we know what whiteness is, we can go through why when a white person does something, it bad. When a POC does something, it good. That's a false dichotomy. I'm being kind of facetious, let's say, but we'll elaborate. We'll throw in some quotes and then we'll elaborate, because, you know, what's he saying when he means that? I'll tell you. Page 57 to 58. We make moves that either maintain or challenge the racist status quo. There are no neutral moves. Inaction is a choice that has consequences and thus is a form of action. Inaction is action. Up is down. Left is right. Our racial moves don't have to be conscious and intentional in order to generate meaning and have impact. In fact, they seldom are, although they should be. We need to continually pay attention to our social positions and how we can leverage them strategically to achieve anti-racist goals. I repeat, don't have to be conscious and intentional in order to generate meaning. In order for you to infer meaning. Oh, if a white person bad, if a POC then good. And you think I'm being hyperbolic or hamming this up. I'm really not, because page 58. For example, a white man doing most of the talking has a different impact on group dynamics than an Asian woman doing most of the talking. The former reinforces traditional power positioning and the latter interrupts it. Did I say I was joking? Did I say that I was... This is like an additional kind of like asterisk or kind of like off to the side, but I have noticed that whenever she does this kind of like false dichotomy of kind of like victim status versus oppressor status, on the victim side, even though this is primarily about race, supposedly, she always picks a woman to be the victim, and I think that comes up later on in this video too, because otherwise it just seems like I'm plucking this out of thin air. I mean, we have one example already, but even still, it's like she always creates this kind of like perfect victim. I think even the previous episode I mentioned how she kind of like conjured up this kind of hypothetical, oh, if a black woman was in the room, how would she feel? You know, I don't know, it's strange to me. Because again, this is apparently about race, but apparently it's also about gender and the whole oppression Olympics, so on and so forth. So again, you know, some people have referred to this kind of line of thinking, whether it's the kind of anti-racism, TM, or critical race theory, so on and so forth, as a kind of like cultural Marxism or ethno-Marxism. And then people are, oh no, it's not, that's not even what Marxism, you know, as though they're incongruent, which they should be if you take Marxism, and it's its own thing. So to add this kind of like prefix of, oh, this is a kind of Marxism, you know, it's the people that are saying it know that it's incoherent. Anyway, but when you read stuff like this of like, oh, if a white person does something, it means this. If a POC does something, it means that, because the white is the oppressor and the POC is not, and therefore, oh, to be a victim and do something is interrupting the system. It's like, again, like usually the idea is like, oh, we're going for equality. It's like, are you? This doesn't seem like equality if you kind of like infer whatever meaning that you want depending on the skin color of the person, you know? What are we talking about? The weirdest part about all of this, to me, or one of the weirdest parts rather, is that throughout texts such as these, often so much of the objective is to decenter whiteness, and we've gone over what whiteness is. Again, this is kind of like ethereal, up in the air language. What does it mean to decenter whiteness? Does it mean white people? Does it mean the ideas of white people? Does it mean some of the things that we went through earlier on? Who knows? But seemingly they come from like a framework that assumes that, you know, if a particular race of people aren't acting in the way that white people are, that like it's systemic racism somehow, of like which kind of like puts white people at like the plane for emulation, because it's like, oh, white people are the standard, and the only reason, you know, for instance, one of the things that we came across was camping, which to me is kind of like banal or kind of like trivial, so to speak. And so it's kind of like, what if black people just don't give a fuck about camping? I don't even know if I went camping my whole life. Is it because I'm systemically being racist against, or, you know, it's like, maybe I just don't care. Maybe there are cultural differences between groups, and that's okay.
That's why black people are smarter. White people, we do crazy stuff. We swim with sharks, we go bungee jumping, cliff diving. Ask a black guy, why do they do that? I go, I don't know, it's white people shit. That's a good answer. They don't sit around going, well, you know, Europe.
The next chapter we have is called Credentialing, because this is a subheading that we have in the book referred to. It's called the same name. It's called that in the book. I've called it that in the video because that just makes sense. And if I were to give a summary of what credentialing is, it's essentially all of the ways in which the whites, TM, will credential themselves to be not racist. And you've probably heard this in other contexts, you know, I'm not transphobic, my auntie turned uncle is trans. I'm not sexist, my mom's a woman. I will say though, before I, you know, rattle off some of the quotes, the whole point is a non-starter, because under this paradigm, white people are never not racist, which is to say they are always racist. And so to even kind of like do this farce of kind of like to try and credential yourself, it's already a non-starter. It doesn't work. Submission, be a little submissive. Oh, that's a little bit hot. Anyway, page 59. While credentialing is intended to establish that we are not racist, it simultaneously conveys its opposite, what we think would indicate that we were not racist. The issue with this paradigm is kind of like the same tools, let's say, that one may use to credential themselves as being not racist. It's never enough, is what I'm saying. There's no qualitative distinction. Not racist or racist. You're always racist, so long as you're white. It doesn't matter if you're an ethno-state person or just a regular schmuck. Page 58 to 59, she gives a few examples of what some phrases the whites would say. And so I suppose we'll go through them with some kind of like pros and cons, let's say. So one of them is, I don't see colour. I went over this in the review of White Fragility. This is figurative. It's not literally saying that they don't see colour. It's, hey, I understand that there have been stereotypes in the zeitgeist, so to speak, and when interacting with another person, I don't internalise them, I don't act upon them, so on and so forth. Of course, though, on the flip side, somebody could do something that's pretty overtly racist, and then play it off as, how could I be racist? I don't even see colour. So, next one, I work in a very diverse environment. This one she elaborates on a little bit later, and it gets particularly heinous, I will say. But, you know, again, you can, in theory, be a racist person and tolerate being in a diverse, which is just a way of saying black. Why do we continue doing this? Anyway, obviously, you know, you can tolerate that, let's say. However, there is a thing that I came across called the contact hypothesis, which suggests that essentially it's familiarity. If you grow up or, you know, are associated with people, you have a familiarity with people that in some facet you could consider different to yourself. Let's say I'm a brown person, I grew up with such and such people, and now I have a familiarity with them, a kinship toward them. I don't see them as other, let's say. And so this idea, like, I get that maybe because this is particularly to the workplace, let's say, but another thing she rules out as well is kind of like, and also growing up in a diverse environment, being a white person, that doesn't make you less racist. And I'm kind of like, well, I would hazard a guess to say that the people that grew up in diverse environments are less racist than people that didn't, and I have examples of that coming up. I am a minority myself. Again, this one usually comes from, like, because sometimes if you're of a marginalized group, sometimes there's this, what I think is kind of like this fictive kinship between, you're marginalized in this way, I'm marginalized in that way, that makes us brethren, we're together now, which is not always the case. So I guess this points out, like, it's correct, but it's also, again, because of the paradigm, there is no criteria that makes you not racist. So it's like, it's all well and good pointing out some of these things that people will say, hey, here's the things that people say to credentialize themselves. And it's like, if the whole thing is a non-starter, wouldn't it be good to have a contrast of some things that could suggest that you're not that? But again, under the paradigm, you are always that. So, you know, I actually came across, and you know, when people come across this for the first time, it comes across as kind of like, that can't possibly be the case, surely, and so on and so forth. I've been in the waters, I've been in the trenches, you know what I mean? So, you know, I even came across like a conversation where people were talking about, if you're a white person, the best you can be is a racist, anti-racist.
Trish Farley, she's a white woman who I met when I started working with the People's Institute of Survival and Beyond. And she calls herself, and I'm borrowing this from her, but she calls herself a racist anti-racist. Again, you know this, and you know, for those people familiar with the People's Institute, the definition of racism, as defined by them, is race prejudice plus power equals racism. So in that definition, I am, as a white person, a racist. So I love that term of, you know, I'm a racist anti-racist.
You know, I probably shouldn't say this, but I actually feel quite sorry for racist white people, or racist people in general. And by racist, I mean in the, I suppose, like traditional sense, the non-lyrical, spherical, miracle sense, you know, just that having a prejudice toward a person or group of people off rip because of ideas that you have about that group, let's say. And I say this because and this isn't to let people off the hook, so to speak, because I think if you have those prejudices, insofar that they can be worked on, you should work on them. Because I feel like you're shooting yourself in the foot anyway by being like, oh, I will partition off large swaths of society because I associate X, Y, and Z. I came across a clip by LBC, which I think is a radio, British one, I don't know. What am I, a boomer? The radio. Anyway, roll clip.
This is quite difficult for me to talk about because it's something that I'm quite ashamed about. I'm a white guy from a rural area, and you know, when I was between the ages of 13 to 15, I was quite a racist person. The lack of education that I received on it and the influx of media influence kind of turned me. I was a paper boy, and every single day I would read the papers as I was going around, and every single day you'd hear negative things in the newspapers about young black kids specifically, and Muslims, and it turned me into this horrible, horrible person. You know, there was one black person in my entire school, and he was a teacher. I was someone who, you know, I went to, a very underfunded school. Yeah. I got bad grades. And I had zero self-worth, absolutely zero. Yeah. And then this group of people said to me, don't worry that that you aren't good in your education. Don't worry that you have low self-esteem. You are inherently better. You are an inherently better person purely because of your nationality and because of your skin color. You're suddenly elevating yourself and your self-worth above thousands, millions of other people. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you know, you were the lowest of the low, but in your own head, you know, you...
Well, everybody, I mean, it makes you feel special, and nothing else in your life at that time did make you feel special. Quite the opposite, in fact. Most of it made you feel, as you say, worthless, no self-worth. And someone comes along and goes, well, you're better than them. And not only are you better than them, but they're coming for what little you've got.
So in that, I want to highlight a few things of note that I think are interesting. He highlights that, firstly, he didn't really know any black people. In contrast, Robin's like, oh, just having proximity to people doesn't mean that you're not racist. And as I've said already, of course that's the case, but it can reduce that, because again, familiarity breeds, you know, compassion and comfort and so on and so forth. Whereas this person, in this example that I just gave, didn't have that. There was also racist media, which is true. Think about a term like black on black crime. Is there white on white crime? Why do we only highlight the negative of race? And, you know, that's on the decline, but, you know, probably still there in part. And then the other thing to highlight is that seemingly this person was of kind of low self-esteem, and being in these racist groups kind of bestowed him status, let's say. So there was an incentivization there. I'm of low self-esteem. I don't know these people. I can elevate my self-perception and be around like-minded people. There's a vulnerability aspect there. And the reason why I bring this up is because in waters such as these, there's usually talk of like implicit bias, and it's usually always a thing of like, hey, you can't control your implicit bias, and therefore I can infer whatever thing that you should be guilty for because, hey, it's implicit bias, you couldn't prove that you're not the thing I'm accusing you of, even if you wanted to. It's not nothing, but I do think it's riddled with inaccuracies and invalidities, and it's usually weaponized anyway. Of course, everyone has their own kind of like implicit biases. You know, you're not the master of your own house. You don't control the way that your brain forms, the kind of pattern recognitions that it forms, and so on and so forth. Additionally, I also came across a clip, and this is quite old, but it's Jay-Z, you know, he's asked about racism, and here's his response on that.
You know, if someone's racist toward you, it's not even about you. It ain't about you. It's about their upbringing and what happened to them and how they led them to this point. You know, most bullies bully. It's happened. Oh, you got bullied as kids, so you're trying to bully me. I understand.
Right.
And once I understand that, instead of reacting to that with anger, I can provide a softer landing. And maybe, oh man, are you okay? I was just saying, there was a lot of fights in our neighborhood that started with, what you looking at? Why you looking at me? You looking at me? And then you realize, oh, you think I see you. You're in the space where you're hurting and you think I see you, so you don't want me to look at you. And you don't want me to see you in such a vulnerable, you don't want me to see your pain. You know, so you put on this shell of this tough person that's really willing to fight me and possibly kill me because I looked at you. You know what I'm saying? Like, so knowing that and understanding that changes life completely.
Again, it's talking about, you know, the insecurity. It's about them. It's not about you, that kind of thing. And so, again, this is why I feel, hey, remember empathy? I actually feel sorry for people that are of a racist ilk, because it's like, hey, that's about you. That's unfortunate. I hope you grow out of that, because otherwise you're just kind of limiting yourself and kind of having these pathological thoughts, let's say, when you needn't have them. And again, because it's often bred by kind of like insecurity and a feeling of low status and just not being around those people to ameliorate those things. You know, integration is good, diversity, etc. This section is called Rushing to Prove That We Are Not Racist, which sounds quite self-explanatory, but we'll go through it because I feel like it illuminates partially why the book is written in the first place, partially why this whole career and life has been lived in the way that it has, quite frankly. I'm going to do a kind of armchair psychology for why I think Robin and people like her are somewhat interested in this strain of thinking, but that's going to come later down the line. So for now, I'll give like a bit of a microcosm or a smaller version of that to provide kind of like illustration for what the impetus of texts like these is. And it comes anecdotally from Robin herself. On page 1, which is essentially, you know how numbers work, it's page 1, it's the beginning. She gives like an outline for an example from her own life where she did a racism and didn't mean to, supposedly, but then she did, and she was young and ignorant and so on and so forth. And it's kind of like, hey, reader, you might be just like me, and therefore you need to read this book because, you know, it's in the beginning, it's relating to the audience. Maybe you'll like me and whatever. One evening, many years ago, when I was in college, I went out to dinner with my partner at the time and another couple. My partner, like me, was white. This couple were friends of hers, but I had not met them before. We planned to meet up at the restaurant. These are very boring sentences. That should have went on. Anyway, we planned to meet up at this restaurant. When we arrived, the couple were already sitting at the table and I saw that they were both black. At this point in my life, I had no black friends and had rarely spent time with black people. I was excited and felt an immediate need to let them know I was not racist. To that end, I proceeded to spend the evening telling them how racist my family was. I shared every racist joke, story, and comment I could remember my family ever making, and yes, I shared these in full, uncensored, can you believe they said that? Detail. So now that I've recited that, I can jump to the later end where she's kind of pondering this, page 72 to 73, and if I am truly honest, I must admit that on some level I enjoyed repeating those stories, laughing at the funny images and stereotypes and believing I was getting away with it. Under the cover of knowing they were racist, I was enjoying racism. So seemingly she has kind of like a mental partition of her self-image. It's kind of like, before I went down this avenue of anti-racism, I was racist, I thought like this and behaved like this and so on. But now, because I found anti-racism, I found enlightenment, now I think like this and behave like this. And so it's seemingly, she has this thing of like, if you haven't gone through this kind of like eye of the needle to become anti-racist in the most paramount sense, her like vision of you is that like, it's who she was years ago, which is to say someone that enjoyed racism. Part of it seems like a kind of like a guilt or kind of like slaying a previous version of you. It's like there's so much guilt of who she once was that this is kind of like, not entirely this, but I think it's part of it of like, there's this kind of like feeling of retribution to kind of like right the wrongs of the past, so to speak. It's like, oh, before I found anti-racism, I was like this, thought like this and behaved like this. But now after anti-racism, I see the error of my ways. And now I go around like Jesus Christ of Nazareth, spreading the good word. I feel like the religious parallel's apt at this point. You did a racism and I used to do a racism and therefore you have to... You need to be better and give me money.
Hey, can you help me kill myself?
Listen, broski, man's gonna keep it a buck, you know. I understand that up until this point, we've kind of been railing a little bit on Diangelo, saying why some of the things that she says are a bit, silly or trite or so on and so forth. But as I said in the beginning of this video, there are points in this book that I agree with, that I think are good, and so let's go through some of those together. This is a section that I'm proclaiming outwoking. I mean, I'm not proclaiming. I think that's also what it's called in the book, the subheading. Anyway, page 66. There is another level of white progressive credentialing that is more common with those that are actively involved in anti-racism efforts. I call this the outwoking move. Rose, a friend of mine who is white and has a long-term commitment to anti-racist activism, shared a particularly painful outwoking experience. Another white person involved in the same activism identified something racist Rose had done. Rather than speak to Rose about it, this person sent Rose an email, CC to others in the group. How am I an adult and I still don't know what CC stands for? Anyway, spelling out the racism she saw, she publicly ended her relationship with Rose, signing off with, "I don't want anything further to do with you." Rose explained, "Over the last couple of years, I've watched progressive white women going after other progressive white women to expose and shame them for their racism. The method seemed to be, if I can call out and publicly shame you for what you've said or done, or got wrong, then I am more enlightened, more woke, less racist than you. This vilification and abandonment does little for supporting one another's growth and is not what is meant by holding one another accountable." Robin Diangelo gets so close to the idea of cancel culture. Hey, if I call you out, I'll get clout for that and you can rot in the... Because that's essentially what happened. A white woman had a problem with another white woman because she thought the other white woman did a racist, and so rather than talk to her directly, she CC'd everyone in the company. Hey, this is why you're bad. This is essentially what happens on Twitter all the time. Give me the social capital by calling you out. Type beat. Again, I do think it's interesting that it's white women on white women. You know, back in the day, media outlets would talk about like black on black crime. What about white women on white women crime? Because I swear to God, nobody hates woke white women more than woke white women. I said it in the previous review, and I'll say it again. I feel like maybe it's kind of like a maternal instinct in the same way that kind of like a mother grizzly has it. It's like, I will protect my cub, my little child, so to speak, but if you get near it, I will tear you to shreds. It's that kind of thing. And like, even though so often it's always, oh, white men bad, white men comparatively really be dodging bullets when it comes to this stuff, bro. Like, it's the fucking Matrix. It's always the white women that get it. White women are Karens. What are white men? Give me a pen and paper so I can take notes, you know what I mean? Continuing on this outwoking thing, she also kind of elaborates to kind of talk about how the whites, the woke ones, the ones, you know, as mentioned, involved in anti-racist practice, they get a bit arrogant. They get a bit up their own ass, so to speak. So, page 68. I am not gaining anything from this as a move of arrogance that not only puts the person above the facilitators, but also above participants who are getting value from the session. If the facilitators are BIPOC people, which doesn't even make sense, Black, Indigenous, people of colour people, you're a clown, your grammar game, 0. Facilitators are BIPOC people or an interracial team, a white participant claiming to not be getting anything of value is an especially undermining power move. Imagine the impact if BIPOC people have made themselves vulnerable by sharing the hurtful slights and indignities of racism only to have a white person announce that they are gaining nothing of value. The lack of awareness or concern about that impact in itself puts the lie to implication that the person is beyond discussion. So if you're, hey, I'm actually above this, you're arrogant, which I guess is kind of true, but I also believe that most of this stuff, it's not great. Still, on the arrogance of those that try to outwoke motherfuckers, she relays a story of a webinar during the COVID era, which we're unfortunately still in, but maybe you're watching in the future and we're not there. So thumbs up to you, I guess. Anyway, page 69, the story is, as one panelist of colour, oh my god, panelist of colour, my guy. Hey mom and dad, here is my friend of colour. You sound fucking stupid. As one panelist of colour, I can't even say it, I'm that triggered. As one panelist of colour was making the powerful point that domestic, agricultural and service workers are essential and also disposable, one chat entry caught my eye. Someone I will refer to as Liam wrote in the chat box, I would like to hear the Indigenous perspective. This was immediately followed by several people thanking Liam for their great point. Exclamation mark. While Liam could be seen as advocating for an oft underrepresented community, this is such a classic white progressive move that it bears further examination. That it bears me further reading into it to make the conclusion that I would like. But before proceeding to analyse how a move functions racially, we need to remember that the impact of a move is different based on the racial position of the person making that move. Hey, this seems like what I would call ethno-Marxism. It's one rule for one rule for the other, based on whether their race suggests oppressor or oppressed. That's crazy talk. You're crazy. Let's assume that Liam is white and break down what happens when white people make this particular move. First, for a white person to interject with what they were interested in hearing while a woman of colour is speaking is both silencing and entitled. There's a couple things in here. Seemingly she's giving the person a pseudonym, in writing the book to not kind of out the identity of the person. Not that she presumably could know the identity, because as she says at the top of this is a webinar. So first of all, she makes the point of silencing, it being silencing and entitled, and I think she mentions interruption at one point. This is a webinar. We've presumably, over the past 2 years, been on that. You write a thing in it doesn't interrupt anyone. Often there are instances of like Q&A. So to ask about like anti-racist educators are supposed to be educated on a myriad of things. They're often not, and are one-trick ponies. However, so to interject, to be like, hey, what would the Indigenous perspective be, as though there's an Indigenous monolith to begin with. But that aside, I don't think it's that disrespectful. And again, no one's being interrupted, no one's being silenced. And also she said, let's assume Liam is white. Based on what, this is a webinar, how do you know? What if this is a black person asking about the Indigenous experience? And that's part of the reason why they're like, hey, I know this already, I'm a black person, you're telling me this, can I hear it? I don't think it's that bizarre. There's this strange level of mind reading, and low-key, I feel like Robin's a bit jealous, you know what I mean? Because she's like, wow, he asked about the Indigenous perspective. I should have been the one to bring that up, and he beat me to the punch. I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm such a clown. Page 70, elaborating on the kind of mind reading from this guy on a webinar, simply asking a question. On page 70, she does this kind of like mind-reading interpretation of what she took from this guy simply asking a fucking question. What you are saying is of no interest or value to me. Rather than appreciate this rare opportunity to hear a woman of colour advocate for her community, I'm going to insert myself into the middle of your talk and let it be known that I want to hear something different. I'm entitled to do so because my interests are more important than what you have to say. What's more, I don't need to wait until you are finished speaking or wait until the webinar is over. I don't even need to think about the impact of my actions on you as a woman of colour. It's so fucking infantilizing to merely... it's asking a question, and then so to cap it off by saying my actions on you as a woman of color, as though you need to be like coddled or babied or something. It's like, oh, look at you, you poor woman of color, you little puppet. So in summary, the examples that she gives are kind of silly, but I do agree in that progressive spheres, and I air quote progressive because to label yourself progressive is the most arrogant thing you could do. I'm a progressive, and therefore the things that I do are in the pursuit of progress. There is definitely this proclivity for the woke people to try to out-woke each other, and often it leads to just throwing people under the bus, in my observation anyway, for the pursuit of social capital. Hey, you're not woke enough. Let the masses of Twitter take you down.
It's all starting to make sense. See, this generation doesn't even understand half the shit that they're saying. They aren't more ethical than us. They just want to be perceived as such. And who could blame them? I mean, they've spent their entire adult lives only 280 characters away from being tweeted into oblivion.
Another highlight of the book, for me, she has a section on objectification, which I think we should go through because I think that it's damn near the best point in the book, even though there's some bits that are kind of, I can write a better point on that. You're fucking trash and you're 25 years in the game. But generally speaking, it's pretty good. So I'll relay that to you and then we'll jump back into, oh, Robin, you silly goose. So page 64 to 65. Objectifying refers to the white tendency to overemphasize the race of BIPOC people. It is a form of color celebrate credentialing that amplifies racial difference. A white person may constantly ask a person of color questions related to race, make racial jokes or comments they don't normally make with white people, enact exaggerated and stereotypical mannerisms they associate with BIPOC people, ask personal questions about their racial experiences, ask them to speak on behalf of their group, and generally bring up race in ways that they don't with other white people. They may also emphasize how beautiful or exotic the person is and make comments about their hair, skin, or size. I feel like I should backtrack a little because I introduced this as the best section. It is. This chunk doesn't give that. Sometimes I'm certain that kind of thing happens and it's, the whites TM that bring that stuff up the most. However, I will say that this proclivity to talk about race and so on and so forth is not strictly a white. I have many a BIPOC friend, my friends of colour. We talk about race from time to time. I don't think it's strictly a white person thing. Anyway, the last part that I want to make a point of, because, sometimes there's conversation of, oh, you're exoticizing a person, you're fetishizing them racially. And I'm considering, what does that mean? Where's the line, I suppose, is what I'm saying. Because in this paradigm, if ever you are accused of racism, there's no really there's no recourse, there's no defending yourself, you are just racist and so on and so forth. And so if somebody, let's say, accuses you of exoticizing or fetishizing someone for their race or their features or so on and so forth, what would you say to that? What would you do to defend yourself? And so I came across an example, and I think that the merging of this happened. I was considering this around the time that Norm Macdonald passed, RIP, and the Met Gala was happening, and so there was a handful of interviews where Keke Palmer was interviewing people, and I think YouTube took Norm Macdonald, Keke Palmer, and apparently, and I like Conan, and there's a clip that I came across, and he is just absolutely smitten with her, and it's kind of and because I was reading this book at the same time, and so I'm just what would a person reading this book, or what would Robin make of this? And so he's so smitten with her. Could you make the argument that he's kind of exoticizing her for her skin or hair or whatever? Because he's clearly into her in a sincere way. But could you make that argument? Where's the line, is what I'm saying. Is he just finding her attractive and charming, or is he's exoticizing her, is he fetishizing it,
I'm sorry, I wish you could have seen the look Norm gave me as you were hugging him. He was like, You did.
Why you put my
He did that, and then you hugged him, and he looked at me like, it works. You're a creep. You're an old codger, you are.
I'm a fat old man. But
No. You are a rapscallion, you are.
I may be a scapegrace, but in this case, I'm absolutely genuine. I don't mean every word of what I said is true.
Thank you.
Moving on, though, on this section of objectification, moving more into the prose of this section, as far as I can tell, I wanted to talk about diversity and tokenism, because as far as I can tell, more often than not, these things are used to sell you something. I did a tweet a few months ago, which I feel like basically encapsulates what I mean by this. And maybe it comes across as cynical, but we'll see about that. The tweet reads, functionally and above anything else, diversity, TM, is about marketing, which I primarily think that it is. Isn't it quite the coincidence that diversity only came cool when it became lucrative? Diversity, generally speaking, is to sell you either a product or ideology. And on the product side of things, don't take my word for it. Take good friend of the show, Joe Biden's word for it.
I challenge you, find today, when you turn on the stations, sit on one station for 2 hours, and I don't know how many commercials you'll see. Lay 8 to 5. 2 to 3 out of 5 have mixed race couples in them. That's not by accident. They're selling soap, man.
Page 65. Objectification happens in personal relationships, but also in organizations wherein racialized people are made highly visible. They may be continually asked to appear in photos in order to make the organization appear more diverse than it is. You know, I don't think representation is a bad thing. In many instances, it's probably a good one. But there are instances where it comes kind of like contrived. It's kind of like, oh, this is just a tick box for you. Whether that's TV shows or, you know, a commercial. It's like, oh, it's a hair commercial and there's like 3 women. It's like, wow, you just so magically happen to come across 3 women. One of them is white, one's Asian, and one's black. And they're all magically, they're just like friends together. Oh, look how nice her hair looks and whatever. I don't know, dude. It's weird. Also, we have different like hair textures. There's no way that we're all using the same product. I'm not using Tresemme like Stacey is. I want to coin a term, and I want to refer to this as the progressive gaze, which is this proclivity to kind of like reimagine society in the way that it ought to be, an idealized way. Oh my god, isn't everybody kind of integrated? And oh, your friendship group ratio, oh, there's an Asian one, there's a black one, there's a white one. I came across a clip by Gerard Carmichael, who is a comedian that I like, and he's black, and so you can't say that he's being a bad boy for saying this. He's asked the question of like, what does representation mean to you, or when does it kind of like stop being about representation? When does representation become bad, so to speak? And he says this.
I feel like misrepresentation is anytime you do representation for the sake of representation. You know, if you just start putting the United Colors of Benetton in your show, it doesn't reflect real life a lot of times. Like we have this tendency to paint this utopia that just doesn't exist. In Los Angeles, if you drive by any school, like high school being let out, you know, you usually see the Asian kids with the Asian kids, the Latino kids with the, you know, Latin kids, and the black kids with the black kids, and everyone kind of sticks in groups. And look, while I would like for there to be a meshing of all these cultures, that doesn't necessarily happen, and it's not true to a lot of people's experiences. And so when I see it on television, it just feels forced and contrived most of the time. Yeah. It feels very cosmetic.
So again, there's this kind of like idea to kind of like restructure things fictionally when it just doesn't happen. Again, this is what I would call the progressive gaze. I don't think it's a thing, but I'm calling it a thing. If somebody says they've coined it before me, fuck them. It was all me. And then I want to talk about tokenization, because low-key, this shit can get you paranoid. Because again, as has been mentioned, there seems to be this proclivity of organizations, whether that's schools or universities or corporations, hey, look how diverse we are because it's hip and trendy now, and so on and so forth. And I, in fact, have a personal story that this happened. It happened to me is what I'm saying. Or the paranoia happened to me. Obviously, there's no way of verifying this. I mean, there is, but no one. If I can't go to an admin and shake the shit out of them and be like, am I a tick box? Anyway, I went to university twice, not to flex or anything, but I have a master's degree. One day I receive an email that essentially asks, hey, we're doing promotional work. Do you want to be a part of it? And at the time it's, hey, we'll give you some money. I can't remember. I don't think it was a lot, but you know, you just stand there and people take pictures of you and it's used for displays. Oh, yeah, sure. That gives me something to do and I get a couple of schmeckles. So I did it. I didn't see this in the wild. Somebody else sent it to me, but this actually went out. Wow, look at that. It's me. I mean, I have a hat on, but otherwise... same person, wow. And I'm going to blur out all the marketing and whatever. I don't rep the university is what I'm saying. Fuck them. But yeah, after the fact, I'm like, was I... because presumably, you know, when I can't remember this because it's a few years ago now, but I presume at some point, they know that I'm a brown person. Is that the reason I was chosen? Because they want to show it off to be diverse and so on. And then because, you know... in the opening to this, there was mention of like, oh, this is a white phenomenon. This is a thing that white people do. You know, this kind of like tokenization, objectification, filling a tick box, that kind of thing. This isn't strictly a white phenomenon at all, because in fact, the brown people do it too. I mentioned the Met Gala already. I'm going to mention it again. This is what AOC mentioned, because... you know, we all saw the dress, I'm sure, but this is how she illustrated it, editorialized the event after the fact. She wrote, proud to work with Aurora James as a sustainably focused black woman immigrant designer, blah, blah, blah. Black woman immigrant designer. That's a funny way of saying millionaire from Toronto. Oh yeah, she's a black... immigrant. It's like, bro, she came a few hundred miles up north in a also very wealthy place and she's a millionaire. What are we talking about? I don't know. And like, obviously those things are true. She is a black woman immigrant, but to characterize her as that, again, it's like, it's what you see, but it's also what you don't see. There's a myriad of ways you can refer to someone's identity, and so to choose those ones in particular, I don't know, it's weird. This, in the business, apparently is referred to as keyword stuffing. You know when sometimes, you know, you'll see someone's kind of argument and it's like all these identity matrices, and it's like, hey, here's why you can't criticize me because I'm a brrrr. So yeah, I think anti-racism, TM, is often much more to do with corporate image, aesthetics, more than it is actually helping actual black people, actually racially marginalized people. You know, Raytheon, the place, the company that literally creates fucking missiles. You know the point where they change their logo to this, and it's like, oh, we're celebratory of all these identity marks. It's like, no, you're not. Like 100 steps back before that, we probably should have taken a look at the kind of like discourse around race and stuff and be like, maybe it shouldn't lead to this thing where a literal fucking missile manufacturer gets clout or feels like they can kind of assert themselves to be more clout worthy should they change their colors to this particular thing. Maybe that, you know, do I have any closing sentiments for this section on objectification? I hear you ask. I think I've rattled off all of them so far. There's no more necessary. Plus, Robin Diangelo does a better job than I could because she writes a point, and one that I actually agree with, so I'll just say that in closing out this section, and then we'll move on to... God damn it, Robin. She's back at it again. Anyway, she writes, page 162. Involvement in anti-racism efforts can become stylish for white people, something cool that provides intense feelings of entertaining insights to be consumed in manageable doses. People become conversant with the terminology, but in practice the terms are almost meaningless.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
Back in the not-so-great territory, we have a heading which is so long that it may as well not be a heading. It is making sure everyone knows you are married to a black man or other racialized person or have adopted racialized children or have racialized grandchildren. If you can't even summarize a heading, maybe your thoughts about this thing are discombobulated and incoherent. The central point of this heading is making sure that everyone knows you're married to a black man. Now, through reading this section, none of the examples that she gives pertain to marriage at all. And that will make more sense as I go, but I just want to give that as a heads up. She gives like a, hey, don't do this, but none of the examples she gives link to the hey, don't do this. It's kind of like she's writing two different essays that don't touch page 92. Being a white woman married to a black man potentially offers deep insights into cross-racial dynamics to bring to the conversation. Sadly, many white women don't demonstrate that their cross-racial relationships have provided a deeper understanding. All too often, these relationships are announced to establish a complete lack of racism. Instead, they demonstrate a lack of sensitivity, self-awareness, critical race consciousness, and historical knowledge. So I'm guessing her point here being made is that people, I guess in this particular instance, white women will hold up, hey, I'm not racist because I'm married to a black person, but then in Robin's mind it's like, well, how not racist are you because you don't assert what she calls critical race consciousness, which is essentially a fancy way of saying, hey, you don't think the way that I think you should, therefore, what do you really know about racism? The weirdest thing to me about all of this is that, like, we're talking about relationships, interracial relationships, but nowhere in this part does it talk about kind of like, you know, the parts of relationships that people get into relationships for, the love, the intimacy, things of that nature. It's only kind of like, seemingly in her mind, or at least in the way that it's conveyed, the only point of being in a interracial relationship is to kind of like use each other or the other person as kind of like a tool for like learning. It's like to ask if like historical knowledge. Whose historical knowledge? Do you need a license to be in a relationship with a brown person now? Whose history is it exactly? What if I'm an ancestor of the Hutus and Tutsis? Does the person I'm in a relationship with need to know about the Hutus and Tutsis? Otherwise, again, in this heading, which is about interracial marriage, making sure that everyone knows you're married to a black man. Once again, she tells the story of Emmett Till, which she also told in White Fragility, so I'm not going to go over again, but suffice it to say, Emmett Till was a teenager. He was falsely accused of being sexually improper with a white woman, and then the white woman essentially had him killed. I think it was her relatives or something. And then this woman on her deathbed was like, haha, lol JK, he didn't do those things to me. So she had an innocent black boy killed. But again, they weren't in a relationship. They weren't married, so I don't know why it's under this section. Obviously, it's a horrible thing to have happened. I just don't know why it's in this section. Anyway, page 92 to 93. While many white women do not know this history, most black women are well aware of it, and it is invoked when white women cavalierly announce their relationships with black men. Yet again, black women are reminded of how much white people don't have to know about our racial history, even when we are in intimate relationships across race. Whose racial history is it? Because usually when they talk about my history or our history, generally speaking, it's just the oppression stuff. Is there anything else? Do you need a license? Hey, do you know about the instruments that my tribe used to use hundreds of years ago? I doubt that's on the list. It's usually just the oppression paradigm, the oppression matrix, so on and so forth. Following on, still on 93, of course, being in a relationship with a black man does not free white women from the inevitable anti-blackness we internalize. White women can and do perpetuate racism in these relationships. British writer Portia Newland shared in The Guardian an incident in which he was fired by his white female boss. I'll relay this story in a second, but again, inevitable anti-blackness. Even if you deny it, that you have an internalized anti-blackness, we know, because that's how racism operates and whatever. It's so, again, all white people racist. People don't actually say that. Yeah, they do, and they even characterize it as saying you have inevitable anti-blackness that you internalize. Okay, buddy. This story that she talks about, this Portia Newland in The Guardian, again, nothing to do with marriage or even a relationship, so I don't know why it's under this section, but the summary of it is that he was a black man. Unless he's died, he is a black man, presumably still alive. Black man, white woman who is a boss. The boss apparently is kind of flirtatious and kind of compliments him in a way that's probably, in the post-Me Too movement, not appropriate, that kind of thing. One day, she asks him to come to her house rather than meet her in the office because apparently she hurt her leg or something or other, and he refuses, and then supposedly he gets fired because of that, because he refused. Once again, should this have transpired in the exact way, which it was just this power dynamic of, hey, come to me, and he was reserved because like, no, because you'll do something or make a move on me that kind of thing. And so he was like, no. In the event that that's the way that it transpired, obviously that's awful, but again, it's nothing to do with being married or in an interracial relationship. You can make the argument that it's about racial dynamics and dating or whatever, but it's not that at all. Newland explains, it's clear to me that this incident is an example of white female privilege being used to dominate a young black man. I was perceived to have no recourse, no agency. I had to submit to being exoticized in accordance with the hypersexualized stereotype that black men are often framed by. I really be out here being hypersexualized, bro. I'm just trying to live my life, and me, yeah, man, just like... Anyway... I'm not saying that this doesn't happen. I think it probably does in some instances. I just wanted to be I wanted to do a little jape. When I refused to reciprocate, I was punished. And then he goes on to talk about, power dynamics and things of that nature. He says, to have an honest discussion about the fact that white women who obviously face a cis, white, patriarchal system of oppression. He definitely went to a liberal arts university. He's got a humanities degree for sure. Also used that patriarchal system to oppress those perceived as lower on the racial and social hierarchy. This obviously is a thing that can happen. Just because people are considered to be oppressed doesn't mean that they have a coalition together, that they're in it together, Oh, we're in this together, we're all oppressed together, but, people cannot. Supposedly, black man is lower on the pecking order than a white woman. I'm gonna keep it $1.50, my broskies. I feel like I hit the jackpot, you know what I mean? In the current times we're living, you know what I mean? I'd much rather be me, which is to say, a black male than a white woman. Maybe I'll edit that out. That doesn't really add to anything. I'm just like, man, I hit the jackpot genetically, you know what I mean? Man's good, like man's out here, man's good. He writes, the danger of loving someone who might possibly racially abuse you in the furious heat of a domestic argument, this confusing seesaw desire of wanting to be an ally for someone's struggle while not having your struggle recognized in return, in addition to white women's deep internalization of anti-blackness that can surface during conflicts when inhibitions are low. Bro, at some point you've just got to ask yourself, if this is the perception that you have of white women and interracial relationships, stop fucking dating them. You know what I mean? This idea that they, have internalized anti-blackness and there's a struggle for them to keep it in check all the time. It's like, maybe... Stop. How good is the pussy, bro? Is the pussy that good that you'll risk being called a nigger? You know what I mean? When inhibitions are low. Like, what? She fucking comes home plastered after fucking 5 drinks or whatever. And this is why you didn't grow up without a father, you black... Bro, who are you dating, bro? You need to vet people better if this is your issue. Page 95. Unfortunately, proximity is not a convincing argument for a lack of racism, obviously. But also you need a flip side of that. What would be a convincing argument for a lack of racism, as we've gone over earlier on? It only conveys a lack of critical consciousness about white supremacy and how it functions. A lack of critical consciousness. To me, this kind of strikes me as an evolution of kind of Marxist language, because in Marxism there's this concept of false consciousness, which is to say that the proletariat, which is essentially the working class, those that don't accrue wealth, essentially, the reason why they are subject and remain subject to those conditions is because they're under false consciousness. They don't know the ways, man, that kind of thing. Whatever critical consciousness is, I feel like it's kind of like a racial evolution of that. In the modern day, we use woke as a pejorative now. 5-10 years ago, BuzzFeed was using it. It was cool to say woke. It wasn't just ironic, And to me, it's kind of like a secular or racialized version of enlightenment, to be woke, to be awake, that kind of thing. I feel like the thing that's most peculiar in this section is that it's oddly specific about white women, which I don't quite understand. It's usually black men and white women. I don't really understand it, because it's not as though historically relationships between other immutable characteristics have been riddled with contention, are up to be problematized, so to speak. What about a black woman with a white man? What about a black man and a white man? Oh, those white men and all their privileges and whatever. Is that not to be problematized? I don't understand why it's just the white women thing. Low-key, I feel like the best relationship that you might be able to manage in 2021, given the just everything happening in the zeitgeist, it might be between black people and Asian people. You can throw political correctness to the wayside. You can say whatever you want, You've come back from shopping with a new t-shirt. Oh, I like your new t-shirt. Oh, thanks. Your cousin probably made it for me through exploitative labor. Ha 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 ha. Oh, where have you been? Oh, I just went to visit my dad. Why do we never hear from your dad? Cry. Throw a white person in there. Oh, you're not allowed to say that because power dynamics. You know what I mean? What I'm saying is Rush Hour is not goated for no reason. As I've been making the case throughout this, none of this has to do with interracial relationships or marriage, which the heading proposed. So I'm like, why is it even in this section? You could have changed the title, and it probably, because it's not like there's nothing, you know, the power dynamics and things of that nature. There's not nothing, but it's also not the thing that she's actually talking about. And the thing is too, interracial relationships can be incredibly straightforward unless you get tangled up in this lyrical spherical miracle. Can I see your license before we go on a date together, please? You know what I mean? And I have an example of this. Stand-up bit, Bill Burr, comedian. There's a point where he's talking about, he's watching an Elvis documentary, and there's a point where a guy, supposedly the person that found Elvis, he describes the process, or like the sound that they're going for. He describes it as this.
This fucking white dude comes on who evidently discovered Elvis. And he's like 190 years old, and he comes out, starts talking. He's just like, well, basically, I was looking for a white boy that could take the down and dirty, nasty blues and combine it with the pristine, angelic sounds of bluegrass. Yeah, that's what he was doing. He was subtly putting black shit down here while he was propping up the white shit. You know, the down and dirty, daddy not sticking around, drug-infested neighborhood blues with the Jesus as white as me, hair the color of the sun, angelic bluegrass playing music, right?
So Bill Burr, who is watching this with his wife, who is black, she takes somewhat of an issue with it. There's somewhat of a back and forth between the why is this bad, why isn't this bad, but then she says,
she goes, no, you idiot, it's not about the leg shaking, okay? It's about, he appropriated a culture. He took all the music, he got all the money, got all the fame, he's called the king of it now, and he never gave a shit, not even a shout out. And I was like, all right. You know, fair enough. You made about 7 or 8 good points there that I can't refute. He appropriated a culture. I get it. You're right. She goes, fine, thank you.
Generally speaking, she explains it, why, let's say, something to him was kind of undetected, on face value at least, but then pretty quickly he gets it. It's not complicated. Here's why it's bad. Here's why you were none the wiser. It's really not that complicated. More often than not, I find that discourse such as this is more so designed not to actually help black people, it's more so just designed to shit on white women, because apparently white women now are the punching bag of society. Oh, you're a Karen if you complain. What if it's legitimate? You're a fucking Karen. Oh, sexism bad, racism bad. White woman, get out of here. I don't know, dude. People just make this shit up as they go along, as far as I can tell. Like, to me, this chapter seems like the spiritual evolution of when I spoke about white women's tears in White Fragility, which was this idea that, like, hey, if you're a white woman and you feel that you're about to cry around people of colour, you should leave the room. Otherwise it makes them uncomfortable or something. I'm not going to over-explain it now. You can just watch that video, but it's quite the ride. Hey, let's just be dismissive of white women for no reason. And also, there are pretty heinous versions of this, one of which I came across here. This idea of, like, if a white woman or a white girl cries, it's automatically, like, manipulative or something. I'm gonna go out on a limb. Sometimes there are instances where people cry manipulatively. You know, I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but sometimes this conception simply goes too far.
So this morning, the baby woke up and had some sort of violence in her heart. I don't know what it was, but she has been losing her mind all day. And it's interesting because I'm watching her lose her mind, and then I'm watching the preteen respond to that by trying to make her happy. And I have had to, like, actively tell him, stop trying to make her feel better, stop responding to her tears. It's so interesting to see the conditioning of people responding to white girl tears happening so early. She's 5, and she's got an 11-year-old coming after her trying to make her feel better when she cries. we have to unlearn this whole business that white women crying is going to get them what they want in life, because that ain't it.
Can you imagine how overcome with ideology one must have to be to refer to their own daughter as having violence in her heart? Oh, it's because white women tears? You're also a white woman. Bro, while we're on the topic of Bill Burr, there's something else that I wanted to point out, and it doesn't necessarily belong in this section, but it's as good enough a segue, and I thought it would be interesting for you to know. There was a point where SNL had Bill Burr host, you know, SNL, the comedy thing that's not funny. They had Bill Burr to host, and he had some jokes in there, some to do with, some were racially based, which is not to say racist. I was about to say, again, he has a black wife, but again, as we've gone over, that's not enough to say that you're not racist. This whole thing you have to like overly explain everything. It's like, well, but not I don't know. It's wild. The discourse game, not 100, my dudes. He did some jokes, some pertaining to race and so on and so forth, and here's one person's response to that. I should point out, I like the joke. I thought the whole set was great, and the backlash from that certain pocket of Twitter to watch that unfold was great also. Anyway, this one guy says, while I'm not suggesting Bill Burr is a racist, a white man having a non-white wife can sometimes be a sign of racism. So you shouldn't assume someone isn't racist just because they own a minority sex servant. They may very well have one because they're racist. Imagine seeing a white man with a black woman and automatically assuming, oh, he probably just sees her as his minority sex servant. You know, the woman that he has kids with, that he admires so much. You go, oh yeah, minorities. Maybe supposed woke guy online, maybe you're the racist. Maybe you see a black woman and see, oh, minority sex servant. The piece is going to... I'm not saying that this is all woke people, obviously. I would like to think it's a very small minority of them, but to say that these pockets don't exist, the ones that like, I'm an anti-racist, and they have the most foul... Before continuing on with this, I'm just going to let Bill Burr's wife, Nia, I'll show you the retweet. So after that, you know, the minority sex servant this, Bill Burr's... Oh, I'm not saying he's racist. Nia, his wife, simply quote tweeted him and responded, bitch, shut the fuck up. I wanna get a W's in the chat. Some of the woke ones are weird. You see a white man with a black woman and be like, oh, he probably sees her as a minority sex servant. Like, bro, maybe that's your subconscious talking. Did you think about that? And I was about to say, so maybe that's the audience that Robin is writing for, but then I thought, if that is the case, Robin can't help them anyway. They're too far gone. This is a grown-ass guy. He cannot be saved. The one saving grace of this part, which again is still not anything to do with interracial relationships or marriage in particular or anything, there's probably something to be said about the standards of beauty that racialized people, black people in particular, face. So I'll talk about that. It's a good point to the rest that is quite the train wreck, and to me just serves to problematize relationships for little to no reason. Anyway, page 94. The ideal woman is consistently depicted as a white woman. In 2005, a link advertised on a CNN page was titled, "The 10 Hottest Women from Around the World. Of these 10, 2 were women of color." I would say, first of all, from an academic standpoint, but given that this is written in this book, that is not robust whatsoever. You know, this one article says, if I did some shit like that in any of the things that I wrote, that would not be considered robust evidence enough anyway. That aside, I feel like I would look at such a list and kind of see it in the same way that, like, I look at the Oscars, generally speaking. It's to prop up our own shit. It's like, I would suspect most of the women are kind of like, from the list were like American born or whatever, or like support Western corporations and things of that nature in some facet, you know? It's like, it's to prop up our own stuff. And I don't know who the fuck is going to CNN to be like, who is the most beautiful of them all? Mirror, mirror on the wall. Because I can do a better fucking job than Robin Diangelo, who is 25 years in the game. Here's a statistic for you that's interesting and speaks to beauty standards and perceptions and things of that nature. And debatably, to internalized racism. On dating apps, black women consistently, as perceived by men, are seen to be the least attractive group to be with. On the flip side, so as determined by women, it's Asian men. So that's something, maybe, to talk about, you know, the desirability. That actually speaks to, I mean, it's not marriage still, but it's closer to relationships, it's dating. Why am I coming up with better points than the person that's 25 years in the game? Continuing on with the standards of beauty chat, page 94. Many black women share the pain of seeing themselves as inherently outside the standard of beauty that consists of silky and most often blonde hair, narrow noses, blue eyes, slim lips, and so on. In 2013, teen filmmaker Kiri Davis made a film titled A Girl Like Me, in which she recreated the famous doll experiment of psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark. A few things there. I would say that you know, that idea of beauty to do with the slim hips and blue eyes, that feels kind of antiquated at this point. That's not popping currently at all. If anything, it's like having big lips are in, because now everyone has lip filler, apparently BBLs, the fat ass thing, even though back in the day it's like seen to be as, oh, you know, people really went out of their way not to have a fat ass, whereas now it's all the rage. The other part though that she speaks about, the doll experiments are apparently an experiment wherein they got a bunch of children to pick, hey, which doll is more attractive, which doll do you want to play with more? And there's a white doll and a black doll, and supposedly the vast majority of people want to play with a white doll. So that's probably something. I don't know how much that speaks to internalized racism from a young age. I don't know. Are most of the participants white? Maybe they want to play with a white kid. I don't know. There's a myriad of variables, but it's not nothing. You know, there's probably something in there, is what I'm saying. So yeah, there's probably a conversation to be had on, you know, the beauty standards thing to do with, what is it? There's featuresism, which I think is to do with the facial features. Oh, how big or small are your lips and your nose and forehead? Texturism, which I think is hair. And then colorism. Because within the culture, it's seemingly, you know, often better to be light skin than dark skin. And, you know, I'm generally speaking I'm not on this kind of same boat of ideas of racism. I understand it, I just don't agree with it. However, there is probably a conversation to be had about, you know, beauty standards and things. But yeah, again, if only you change the fucking title to something more appropriate. If it was like, I don't know, the plight of black women dating prospects or not fitting standards of beauty, there would be something in here. But bottom line is, because this is to do with relationships and marriage and whatever, fuck who you want. Consensually, of course. Be with who you want. If someone makes you have a license to be with them, they're probably a red flag. And yeah, that's this section on hating white women, part 2.
But I do think white women, it's our turn to admit that we are also part of the problem. I know, it's really uncomfortable. White women are like, I did not come here for this.
Back again, once again, for another Hall of Famer. We have silence. You've heard the platitudes. White silence is violence. But what does that actually mean? Why is that actually the case? Supposedly. Let's find out. Before this part of talking about silence, she talks about carefulness, which, to summarize, is this idea of some instances there are progressive white people that are too careful around black people, and it kind of makes them kind of not act normal, so to speak. So on page 104, she writes, I have also seen why they experience white carefulness as racism. This is talking from a black person's perspective. I certainly wasn't warm, relaxed, sincere, or open when I was being overly careful, which, you know, this feels like a massive I told you so, because if you conjure up a climate of white people have to be on their P's and Q's, and that's probably putting it mildly, there's this kind of like, oh, I don't want to come across racist, oh, I want to come across racist. You know, it probably makes you double think everything, triple think, quadruple think, quintuple think, and, you know, everything becomes kind of like 4D chess and math equations. And if I do this, would I come across as this? If I do that, would I come across as... Anyway, so yeah, back to silence. Page 104. Silence is carefulness in the extreme. I have written extensively on white silence in discussions on racism because it is such a ubiquitous, maddening, and problematic pattern. She then goes on to tell a story where she's doing a talk with 15 progressives, and then she highlights 4 of whom are people of colour. So, page 105. After some brief remarks on white socialisation, I opened the floor to questions. I soon noticed a pattern in which the same few people were speaking, but the majority of the group, and the white people in particular, remained silent. I named this pattern and invited the white people to show themselves. You can see them. Show yourself! I know it's figurative, it's show me your whiteness. Anyway, after a few moments of uncomfortable silence, a woman of colour who had been sharing previously began to speak again. I asked her to hold back and let the white people feel the pressure and struggle through their silence. Feel the pressure and struggle through their silence. That, to me, comes across as schadenfreude, as a form of sadism. It's like, oh, let me see you struggle, child. Why? What is wrong with you? Again, on page 105, she mentions how, okay, so there's 4 people of colour, as I mentioned, but apparently 2 of them came up to her at some point and said that they felt empowered. Oh my god, thank you so much for making... Like, dude, if you felt empowered by somebody acting sadistically, you have a brittle spirit. Continuing, page 105. I returned to my pressure on the white participants. I explained how silence from a position of power is a power move. So this is all 4D chess. This has been mentioned already somewhat, but again, it's the kind of like, well, if you're white, you're in a dominant position. If you're a person of colour, you're in a submissive position. Oppressor, oppressed, and therefore, if you don't speak as a white person, you're doing a bad. But if you don't speak as a person of colour, you're not doing a bad. Also, if for whatever reason you've gotten this far as a Caucasian, as a white person, and you think that for whatever reason, because you have some other identity aspect to you that makes you marginalized and therefore free from criticism from this book's perspective, in the words of A$AP Rocky, you ain't safe. It ain't safe, it ain't safe, it ain't safe, it ain't... Page 106. The white people in the group were the epitome of progressives. The group included non-binary white people, Jewish white people, and white people with disabilities. Most were under 30. They were interning in a program that centered an anti-oppression framework in counseling, which recognizes that inequality is structured into society and manifests in a range of forms, including classism, sexism, racism, ableism, heterosexism, transphobia, ageism, and anti-Semitism. Given that in the case of racism, the worst fear of most white progressives is that they be perceived as racist, and both myself and the BIPOC people in the room gave them direct feedback that the effect of their silence was racism. How could they continue to hold back? What was going on? Maybe they felt intimidated. Did you think about that? Also, one of the things that I think is interesting to highlight is that she mentions, and white people with disabilities. She doesn't elaborate on what disabilities they have. So to me, it's like, well, what if one of them, for instance, had an anxiety disorder? But then again, there's still this proclivity of, hey, you need to speak because not speaking is racist. It's so strange because, like, again, in the, usually in frameworks such as these, it's like you need to decenter whiteness, which often is a thing of, hey, white people don't speak. But now on this side, it's, hey, you need to speak. Otherwise you're racist. Speaking too much racist, not speaking enough racist. And then there's this, oh, why do white people feel as though that... It's like, dude, it's such a, like... Again, in lay people society, this is not the case. I don't think it's when you're in particular environments such as these and everything becomes like 4D chess. 107. Seeking to regain comfort and a sense of racial stability is a predictable yet problematic response for any white moves that are intended to maintain racial comfort necessarily work to maintain traditional race relations. When white people employ silence to maintain a degree of comfort, that silence functions as a means to maintain control. Again, if you do something as a white person bad, there's no excuse at all, which she goes on to talk about. Because I consider, again, I just mentioned the thing of what if you have an anxiety disorder, for instance. No, there's no excuse. Page 107. Over the years of facilitating discussions with white people on racism, I have heard many rationales for white silence. And then she lists a few. It's just my personality. I rarely talk in groups. Literally me. I mean, it depends on the situation. But yeah, that to me seems valid. You want to listen more than you want to speak. That's fine. But again, no, that's not valid because you're a white person to do something from a white position is to maintain white power, control, whatever. I'm trying to be careful not to dominate the discussion. That seems fair enough. Again, particularly when, as I mentioned, as an anti-racist, you're supposed to decenter whiteness. So to not want to dominate the discussion seems fair enough. I don't feel safe. This one is interesting because often in areas such as these, the kind of social justice-y things, there's usually a proclivity to bring up safe spaces and things of that nature. So for her to say that actually proclaiming that you don't feel safe is bad, there seems to be kind of like a conflict between safe space-ism and anti-racism, because it's kind of like your safety is not important compared to being an anti-racist advocate, so to speak. So that'll be interesting to see how those things mash together in the future to come. I don't want to say the wrong thing and offend anybody. Seems fair enough, especially since there's been this influx of, oh, if you do this or don't do that, it's a microaggression, or that's a subtle racism, or a big racism. You did a big racism to me. Page 108, this part on silence, it essentially caps off by saying actions, whether they're taken by a white person or a person of colour, have different meanings because of the power relations that they have. And it's like, bro, this is like, can I not just exist, bro? Can I not just do a thing or not do a thing and it not be kind of like siphoned through the matrix of whatever my identity is? What if I'm talking what is considered too much? Oh, well, you're actually interrupting the traditional power of something because as a black person you've been marginalized to. Okay, what if again I'm talking allegedly too much? Oh, well, as a man, you feel entitled to. It's like, no matter how ineffectively I may have facilitated, in the end they did not show up. They did not demonstrate progressiveness in any identifiable way, and their BIPOC co-workers noticed. That sounds like a threat. Also, it's a no true Scotsman, because it's like, well, if you do not behave in my particular version of what I consider to be progressive, you're dismissed as even being progressive. It's like, oh, what is said? You didn't demonstrate progressiveness. I did have a tag on, and because I really wanted to illustrate how there's really no out for this. There's no good enough excuse to not act in accordance at the way that they want, because there's a section called "What About My Trauma?" and there's a few quotes that I had. This is from pages 130 to 137. Essentially the point is, hey, whatever trauma that you have is not relevant. You need to get over it in order to work in accordance with anti-racism. Page 137. For white people to focus on the collective work of anti-racism, we must learn to compartmentalize our own forms of trauma. Again, this safe spaceism and anti-racism seem to be in conflict here, because safe spaceism would never be like, hey, you need to get over your trauma. That's like the cardinal sin, as far as I can tell. If someone feels that they may have a breakdown, they should leave and seek professional support, and all of us should be attending to any distress in our lives that gets in the way of anti-racist struggle. So again, to cap off this, the point of, the silence and, hey, there's no excuse, and, even if you've got trauma, whatever, and it's like, it seems like your destiny as a white person, as far as this book is concerned, and the ideology behind it is kind of like, hey, if you're a white person, your destiny is to become an anti-racist proponent, propagator, and basically nothing else. Doesn't matter what trauma you have whatsoever, because it's like, if you're going to, in an absolutist fashion, say that no trauma that you have is relevant, it's kind of like, well, there are certain kinds of trauma that I probably won't say, but I'm sure we can all think of them. It's like, are you going to rule that out at all? Because again, if you say something in an absolutist way, you have to contain everything within it. So it's like I don't know. It's very all or nothing. It's all black and white. It's, hey, do what I say in this narrow manner, otherwise you're not even a progressive. It's, yeah. I have been filming this thing for so long that the sun is starting to set, so I just hope I can edit it into something entertaining and fun and informative and so on, but I'm sure you'll be the judge of that. I just hope you enjoyed this part, and hopefully you stick around for the next one. Of course, watch the previous part if you haven't already, and then we'll finish off with the final thoughts. Man is fucking knackered, you get me? I think I'll do an insert, so this isn't all at the end, but the like and the comment and things, because I always enjoy reading those and responding to those. But yeah, we've got one more part to go, and so depending on when you're watching this, maybe you can just watch it right now, but we'll see. If not, and you still want to fix and you haven't seen the previous part, that'll be on the left. left. If the next part is there on the end screen, it'll be on the right. I'm gonna get out of here because this video is probably long enough. I don't need to elongate it with an outro. So, as always, thanks for hanging out with me. I had fun hanging out with you. Parasocial relationship game 100.
デートに来る